This podcast is brought to you by Most Valuable Podcasts, leading the league in podcasting entertainment.
Welcome in, my friends, to a very special edition of Behind the Pen. My name is Mike Rankin, and I am your host for today's MVP show. And it's going to be a little different because usually I have a full show, but this in particular is so important that it's going to be its own little segment, and we're going to post it by itself because I have Brian Bilek from FutureSox.com with me tonight, and we're going to talk some White Sox because there's a lot of White Sox news going on. So this is very special. I hope you enjoy it. Quick note, you should become a patron. Go to patreon.com/mostvaluablepodcast and donate a couple bucks. You know, it helps us produce fantastic content for you, and you get exclusive stuff. So think about that. If you want to join, fantastic. We appreciate it. If not, it's okay. Follow us on Twitter at mostvaluablepod, as well as Snapchat. Follow me at Rankin906. And I hope you enjoy this interview. All right, now I'd like to take the time to introduce my guest for this show. And boy, I wouldn't want anybody else coming on Behind the Pen to talk White Sox baseball at this point. My man, Brian Bilek from FutureSox.com. You can follow him on Twitter at @BrianBilek_. He's got everything you need to know about White Sox baseball. Brian, thank you for taking the time.
Mike, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to join you, especially after a nice first day of the draft for the Sox yesterday.
Absolutely. We're going to touch on that too, but first I got to start with the, I guess, more exciting news that went down with the White Sox, especially since the top prospect just got called up, and they made 3 offseason signings, late offseason signings: Latos, Austin Jackson, and Jimmy Rollins. Now, Latos and Rollins are both DFA'd. They're gone. And now Austin Jackson's hurt. And we'll touch on that in a little bit. But in the wake of the Rollins DFA, we finally get a chance to see Tim Anderson. And the last time you joined me, you were excited about Anderson. You actually said that he would come up at some point of the season. Are you kind of surprised that he's up this early in the beginning of June?
You know, following the Sox league specifically, you're never surprised when they move someone quickly. I would have thought it would have been more towards September, but just the way they signed Jimmy Rollins, I mean, they didn't sign him for a lot of money. It was a cheap contract. He is a guy that last year performed as someone who, is replaceable in a sense, and he was even worse this year than he was last year. So I think there's definitely reason to believe that they're going to get improvement out of the production at that position. I think Tim Anderson, watching him go from each affiliate, he does struggle at each affiliate. He still has to catch up. I mean, these pitchers aren't going to be, they're not going to be the AAA pitchers he was facing these last few months, and they're certainly not going to be like the pitchers he's been facing in the levels below that. So I wouldn't be surprised to see him struggle in the beginning, but I think the Sox know he's going to take some time to adjust, and they're going to give him that time, and hopefully by the end of the year, he's, a plus contributor at shortstop. Another
move that they decided to make within their rotation is to get rid of Latos. And, Latos started the season very well, and it was obvious that, he would have to come back to earth at some point. And so in the wake of his DFA, they called up another prospect that White Sox fans are pretty excited about, and Tyler Danish. What can you tell me about Tyler Danish?
Well, everybody's surprised about Anderson. I wasn't surprised about Anderson. I am very surprised about Tyler Danish. I had the fortune to interview him probably just before the season started, or no, just about a month ago. I interviewed him, and he's a guy. He's got a strange arm action, kind of 3/4 delivery with a lot of the top half, a lot of the velocity coming from his top half. He's a fastball, slider, cutter, and a changeup. And he's a guy that struggled to get left-handed hitters out. He's a guy that most scouts see as a reliever, although he's been starting for a long time. And I think this is probably going to be a temporary call-up, and I don't have any inside information on it. That's just my opinion. Just because the Sox, they had Latos get shelled in his last start. James Shields got bounced early in his first start for the Sox. So they might need a guy who goes 2 or 3 innings and kind of saves the rest of the pen some work. And I think he's a guy who's, unorthodox enough, and a guy that the league doesn't have a book on, so he can kind of come in and maybe give you a few good innings and save your pen for the week.
You brought up James Shields and that move that Rick Hahn made. And it was a move that was pretty much necessary because he's an upgrade over, at the very least, Latos and Danks. And essentially, you pick up 2.5 years remaining on his contract. And the positive thing is the Padres get to pay more than half that salary, so that's kind of a win. But it's kind of like the White Sox made their free agent acquisition in June, if you know what I mean, because they're investing so much of their payroll in Shields. They gave up Eric Johnson, young pitcher, stayed with the White Sox for a while, didn't really pan out, and international prospect, a young player. So I guess the deal wasn't too bad, but what do you think of this James Shields trade?
Well, I heard about the trade before anyone else had, just because it was my friend who actually broke it. So that was pretty cool for me. And he came to me and he said, what do you think of Shields? And I said, I really don't hope the Sox are trying to get him, because I knew how much money he had left on his deal. I knew he was a guy that has a tendency to let up fly balls, and I knew that's not going to translate well over to the American League and U.S. Cellular Field.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, when he told me the cost of Eric Johnson and Fernando Tatis Jr., I told him, this rumor is legit. Your guy's legit, because nobody knows who Fernando Tatis Jr. is, and I know the Sox. They didn't really think highly of Eric Johnson over the last few years. So I think they give up very little in the way of prospects, even if Eric Johnson goes to the National League and finds himself like many American League pitchers do. I know your Cubs could definitely attest to that.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think they gave up a lot, and I think the amount of money that they gave, the Padres gave the White Sox, is a good risk diversification tool for the Sox. And if you look at the free agent class this offseason, Rich Hill is headlining the starting pitchers. So even if the Sox, are out of it this year and they want to regroup and go for it again next year, not that the Sox are out of it, I think they got a guy that they could slot that back in the rotation. He might be susceptible to giving up bombs, but he's gonna give it everything he's got, and he's a guy that's thrown 200 innings for nine seasons in a row. So with the free agent class coming in and the Sox need for starting pitching, I think it's going to be a good move, even though Shields looked so poor the other day.
Right. I think that was absolutely a good move, and I think you touched on a lot of important points there. And obviously Shields isn't going to be that terrible his last two starts. So what are you going to do? It happens. But yeah, going forward, I think the Shields move will essentially be a win. But a lot of moving parts going on with the White Sox roster, and another signing that they ended up making, and I'm actually surprised this player was available for this long, but Justin Morneau signed on a 1-year contract, and I know he's injured and he probably won't be able to join the team until maybe July, but what do you think about this signing?
Well, I helped run a message board, and one of our posters yesterday, about an hour before the deal came, said the Sox are going to sign Justin Morneau, and they're like, yeah, sure, And he's like, no, they're going to sign him, and it's going to be released today. Sure enough, it comes up 45 minutes later that they signed him, and what he said was that this is something the Sox are doing just in case that they're not able to get the bat that they want via trade. The Sox are very active in the trade market. They're going to be in on every left-handed bat in particular, but every premium bat that's going to be out there, the Sox are going to be checking in and trying to acquire. But I think in Justin Morneau, he did very well last year. He had over 300. He had over 800 OPS, but he did play in Colorado. His stats do look good on the road, so that kind of pulls away from that Denver effect. But I think for $1 million, I mean that's a pittance in the American League or in the major leagues, and I think it's definitely a risk worth taking. I'm certainly of the belief if you're going to bring a guy in for $1 million with a track record like his, you can't lose on that deal as long as you cut bait on him if he doesn't have it. But he's got some rehabbing to do, and as you said, it's going to be about a month or so before he can contribute.
Yeah, I definitely think. I mean, he might be better than maybe 3/4 of their. Well, not 3/4. That's kind of a stretch, but he's a solid bat, and he's still got some production left in his game. So yeah, I liked it too. I thought it was a very smart signing. At least to have a left-handed bat, you don't have to go searching. But let's talk about some injury concerns that the White Sox are dealing with now, and there have been a couple blows to the bullpen. One not as major, and one that kind of really sucks. Because Petrishka, he's out for the year, and Daniel Webb needs Tommy John surgery. And on top of that, your starting center fielder, who's been very good, especially defensively, Austin Jackson has a torn meniscus in his knee, and it looks like he might miss some extended time. What can the White Sox do? Because I know they brought up Jason Coates. What can the White Sox do in the meantime, especially in the bullpen, to overcome these kinds of injuries?
Well, the bullpen, I think Jake Petrishka really hurts, and a lot of fans aren't the biggest fans of the biggest fan of him. And, I'm certainly, not Petrichka's biggest fan. But what he brings, a lot of times doesn't show up. It doesn't show up in the stats. He's a guy that the Sox know they could call, even though he threw the day before, even though he threw 2 days before. He's got a rubber arm, and I think Robin Ventura has leaned on him, the last 2 years, even with varying results. Daniel Webb, he's probably, the 10th, 11th guy in the bullpen, and you hate to lose that depth. But it brings the Tyler Danish call up back because the Sox needed to go to Double-A because they had so many injuries, both with the Major League club and the Triple-A club. But touching on Jackson, I think that one really hurt. Obviously the Sox have been scuffling in that Detroit series. Was it was terrible for fans to watch. And the Sox were without Melky Cabrera, and they were without Austin Jackson. And you really saw, losing those two guys at once, it made a big difference. And J.B. Shuck filled in center field, and, I'm sure he gave it his best, but the results weren't there. He's not a center fielder. He shouldn't be out there. So I think this might expedite the process as the White Sox looking to pick up an outfielder, whether that's Jay Bruce, whether that's Reddick, whether that's Carlos Beltran, Brett Gardner. These teams got to figure out if they're contenders or not. And if the Sox are one of those teams that are contenders, they're going to be looking to take an outfielder from one of these teams that aren't. I think ultimately what we're going to be seeing is Adam Eaton shifting back to center field with a bat moving into the right field spot.
Yep, definitely. I think that's a very legit possibility. You know what? You contribute to Future Sox, and what Future Sox does is really focus on the White Sox prospects and their farm system. This draft, now we're going to talk about some draft picks here because I personally they had the 10th pick and the 26th pick in the first round, and I got to say I like the moves that they made. Let's talk about two of those guys, Zach Collins, catcher out of Miami, and Zach Birdie out of Louisville. He's a guy, Birdie, who touches triple digits sometimes. Do you think, now, is this out of the question, do you think the White Sox can bring up Birdie maybe by September?
I think you'll see Birdie in a White Sox uniform this year for sure, yes. But, the Sox are very happy with the way the draft went. The Sox are a team that very rarely leaks what's going on in their head, very rarely lets other teams know what they want to do. But that being said, after the fact, they let me know Zach Collins was the guy they wanted at pick 10. And you saw a guy in Kyle Lewis who was supposed to go in those top 3-4 picks, and he slipped, and he was available when the Sox picked at 10. You saw a guy like Rutherford who was a top 5 talent, and he slipped as well. The Sox wanted Zach Collins. They think he is the absolute best bat in the draft, and they think he's going to be a quick mover and move in the way that Kyle Schwarber and Michael Conforto have. And then touching on Birdie, I definitely think he's going to be in the league this year. I think he could pitch in the bullpen right now. I don't think the Sox are going to, make him make that jump. But this is, maybe the best college reliever in terms of a scouting profile we've seen in a few years. He's from Downers Grove. He is a family friend of my dad's best friend lives in my uncle's neighborhood. So I'm definitely excited because I got the connection with him. They're very excited in Downers Grove to have him, join the White Sox. But he's a guy. Him and Collins are essentially going to contribute. I think Birdie in 2016 and Collins next year. And you you're going to get some value out of the draft with both of those guys being sure major leaguers. But then what I liked is the risk diversification of taking a guy like Alec Hansen at 49. Because if you and I were talking on this podcast a year ago today, and you said who's going to be the number 1 pick in the draft next year, I would tell you, well, right now it's looking like it's Alec Hansen. And the guy had a very tough year, but at the same time, he's got a power arm. He's 6'7". He's got a lot of mechanical stuff that's a little tougher for him to deal with at that size. And Don Cooper and Kurt Hassler, the White Sox pitching coordinator, they see some things that need to be adjusted in his delivery, and they're going to attack that. And I think the White Sox, could potentially come out with a big steal at 49 if all goes well with Alec Hansen.
Awesome stuff, man. As always. Now, as I end this interview, I got to ask you now your opinion. How much value does a manager have on his ball club? Because obviously they're in charge of creating an atmosphere and managing. Well, I mean, it's Robin kind of lets his players police the clubhouse. Now, is it up to him to create this chemistry and mesh, or what do you think the value of a manager is? Because people are calling for the head of Robin Ventura. Now, me personally, I don't know how many wins that'll change the White Sox this season, What do you think?
I'm not a big believer in the idea that managers have this, drastic effect on the outcome. In simplicity terms, there's 5 managers who are very good and they affect the clubhouse, they affect the chemistry and all that. And there's 5 that are very bad and they're tactically flawed and they make some bad decisions. And then there's 20 that are just, whatever. And I think Robin's in those 20 managers. For whatever reason, the fans on the South Side, they cannot stand him. They want him out. I typically choose to stay away from those conversations just because, it's amazing the Sox could get blown out 11-1 with their bats being silent and their pitchers being off, and it's still Ventura's fault. I don't subscribe to that ideology. I think it's been so bad here the last month that there was merit to the idea of firing him. But I really don't care either way. The players got to perform. They're brought here to execute. If they don't, perform to the percentiles that the front office is expecting them to, things aren't going to go, the way the White Sox fans wish. Ultimately, I don't think there's an issue in the clubhouse. I think, any players that had issues with Robin Ventura are no longer on this roster. And those aren't the guys that got released earlier. I think, those are guys that were released in years past. I think the White Sox players like playing for him. Veterans love Robin Ventura. And they say that on the record and they say that off the record. So I think, if the White Sox put it together and they allow, Chris Sale and Jose Quintana to really anchor this team, they're going to be all right, whether it's Robin Ventura at the helm or Rick Renteria or Ozzie Guillen for that matter. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter. The players got to execute. The players got to, earn their salaries, and that's what it comes down to.
Very well said. Once again, Brian Bilek for Future Sox, thank you so much for taking the time. Lots of White Sox moves going on. Wouldn't have anyone else jump on and talk to me about everything. Once again, man, thanks a lot.
Thank you for having me on. We'll talk soon, brother.
That was Brian Bilek from FutureSox.com with excellent content as always. And if you like what you heard and you want to hear more, you have to go right here. MostValuablePodcast.com has all your sports content needs, whether it's football, NBA, college sports, anything, even some video games. You like video games? Check us out. Go to our YouTube channel, subscribe to us at Most Valuable Podcasts. Follow us on Twitter at Most Valuable Pod. Thank you all for listening. We will see you all next time.
Thank you for listening to this MVP podcast. Follow us on Twitter at Most Valuable Pod for more great podcasts.